because we have short time today and lots of information, lots of discussion, lots of things to cover. So my name is Doug Dixon, Encore Boston Network and co-chair of the program committee for the Encore Network. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for joining us today. We've used the chat to let each other know. If you could put yourselves on mute, that would be really helpful so that others of us are not distracted by what's going on in your space. We've used the chat to let each other know who's here today, and that's also the way that we'll indicate questions or comments as the program proceeds. So even before it's time to ask questions, if you have one and you're thinking of it now, please enter it. And we will work that into the conversation. And if we can't do that, we'll catch up at the end of the program during the Q&A session. This is one of our regular monthly meetings. And if you were, for those of you who were with us last month and were able to hear Ash Napawhite and Connie Zweig and Rick Moody, I think you have a sense of the kinds of things that we're doing. Today, we're going to have three of the premier journalists working in our space, talking to us about their work, and we'll be talking to them about ours. And we'll be providing additional information about upcoming programs at the end of today's webinar. By the way, I just wanted to mention that we will be using the spotlighting feature today so that you can see better who's speaking. But if you'd like to see everybody who is in the room, go to view in the upper right-hand corner. And if you click that, you can select gallery, and that will allow you to see, to scroll across the top or along the side, others in the room. And feel free to talk to each other on the chat as well. So now to moderate today's program, I'd like to introduce Lenora Inez Brown. Laura is a senior fellow at the Cleveland Leadership Center. She's also co-chair of our communications committee and a member of the Encore Network Leadership Council. Her background is in dramaturgy and theater, which she taught at one point in her career. She's also taken turns in TV news production, communications, and many other roles. So that's a short way to say that I think she's eminently qualified to moderate today's program. I'm thrilled to have her with us today. Lenora, over to you.
Thank you, Doug. Welcome to everybody. We're so glad to see you all. I'm excited because today's conversation brings together three leading journalists shaping and documenting the new narrative for those 50 and over. Together, these writers transform the staid topics of workforce, retirement, and affording healthcare into stories that better reflect the dynamic elements and life that people over 50 are living. The combined journalistic talents of Richard Eisenberg, Chris Farrell, and Kerry Hannon better bring together the knowledge that have led to publications, radio and television broadcasts, and podcasts. It's my pleasure to welcome Richard, Chris, and Farrell and Kerry to our program. And it's time to meet the journalists. Richard Eisenberg. Richard is the managing editor of Next Avenue, a digital publication covering the impact of healthcare, money and policy, caregiving, and work and purpose. For all of those topics are for those 50 and over. In addition, Richard is the editor of the Money and Policy and Work and Purpose channels for Next Avenue. His two books are How to Avoid a Midlife Financial Crisis and The Money Book of Personal Finance. In addition to Next Avenue, which you can find at nextavenue.org, he has worked at Money Magazine, Good Housekeeping, Yahoo. He has also hosts a podcast called Friends Talk Money, and that's available wherever you find your podcasts. Kerry Hannon. Kerry writes to enhance and improve the employment and wealth opportunities for all, with a special emphasis on women. She is a prolific writer, managing to write and publish a book a year. Her most recent books are Great Pajama Jobs and Never Too Old to Get Rich. Her newest book is titled In Control at 50 Plus, How to Succeed in the New World of Work. It is currently available for pre-order through McGraw-Hill Publishing and Amazon. When she isn't writing, she's grooming horses and hanging with her dogs. Chris Farrell. Chris focuses on expanding our definition of the creative economy, which actually extends beyond Richard Florida's creative class, which refers to artists and artisans. Chris defines the creative economy to include those who blaze trails that dramatically transform lives. Chris contributes to Marketplace, which is broadcast on most public radio stations, and he is a co-host of the podcast titled Small Change, Money Stories from the Neighborhood for Minnesota Public Radio. His most recent book is Purpose and a Paycheck, Finding Meaning, Money, and Happiness in the Second Half of Life. Each of these writers outlines how to change the conversation and transform the future. And today we are going to gain a rare look behind the curtain to find out what it takes to write these stories. So welcome to our guests, and again, welcome to all of you. Today's conversation is going to have three parts. For our first part, we're going to get to know the Encore Network a little bit. Now that the Encore Network has been independent from Encore.org for a year, we want to introduce the new Encore Network to Richard, Chris, and Kerry. And we thought it would be fun to let them discover who we are and where we're headed and how we might collaborate to bring stories of transforming the Encore stage of life to a wider audience. And so we've invited them to interview some of our members who will introduce to you in just a few moments. For our second part, we're going to turn the tables and I'm going to interview the journalists, and we're going to see what they're writing about, what trends they see, and how we, the Encore Network, can be helpful in their work. Finally, we will share your questions with our guests. So be sure to place your questions in the chat as they occur to you, and we will do our best to incorporate them in today's conversation. To begin, let's introduce Richard, Chris, and Kerry to some of our Encore members. Hailing from South Carolina, Larry Stewart. Larry has been a member of the Encore Network, for about a year, and he has been contributing his talents in a variety of ways. He is also the founder of Reinvent You. Coming to us from Washington, D.C. is Dr. Elise Barnes. She is also one of our newest members. Dr. Barnes is the owner and lead trainer of A Certain Vintage Workforce Education. Welcome, Elise and Larry. And from the Encore Network Leadership Council, we have the chair of the Encore Network, Janine Vanderberg. Janine is also the director of Changing the Narrative, which is based in Colorado, and she is an Encore Public Voices Fellow. Doug Dixon. Doug is the co-founder of the Encore Network and one of our longest serving members. He is board chair of Encore Boston Network and a co-chair of the Encore Network Program Committee. Welcome to you all, and I invite everyone to meet the journalists. Richard, Kerry, and Chris, take it away.
Thank you so much, Laura, and hi, everybody. It's so great to see you virtually. Nice to see some friends. And I'm going to kick it off by asking questions of Janine and Doug. And Kerry's going to ask some questions of Elise. Chris is going to ask some questions of Larry. I'll be back to ask some more questions of Doug, and then we will turn it back to you all guys. So maybe like some of you, I've been watching the TV show Succession recently, but here I'd like to ask about secession. So I wonder if maybe Janine, you can start by talking a little bit about why are you now separate from the Encore.org group that we know and love? what's different about the Encore Network now that it's independent? And after you answer that, maybe Doug can say a few words about the same thing.
You bet. So first, welcome everyone, and Rich, Kerry, and Chris, thanks so much for being here. So one, we did not secede, if you will, from the union. I think what happened in becoming independent to me is a natural evolution of what happens when a big idea takes off. So the big idea being Mark Friedman's about this encore stage of life. And it took off literally from its inception with, I think a lot of us around the country starting what became known to be as encore programs, because people were enamored with the idea, but encore.org never really has been a program operator. They've been a generator and a catalyst for really big ideas that change the world. And so one of their big ideas is we have value as we get older. And I think people started to operationalize that. And all of a sudden, and this kind of created something called the Encore Network. We had the very capable assistance of Betsy Worley. Hi, Betsy, glad you're here. In recognizing that there was a power here of connecting people who were doing all of this local grassroots work on the ground. And so from that and through Doug and Betsy's efforts, along with a few other people, this thing was formed about a decade ago that was called the Encore Network. As Encore continued to develop new ideas and focus more on generation to generation work, what Encore is now calling co-generate, and their strategic planning was leading Encore more in that direction, I think all of us who were involved in doing the grassroots work on the ground said, still important for us to stay connected, still important for us to learn from each other. And so this idea came around of spinning off, becoming independent, if you will. And Doug, I'll let you, if anything you want to add to that about why we separated, and then I'll talk a little bit about what's different now that it's independent.
Yeah, I would just add one other thing, and it's kind of a historical note, and that is, we're part of a proud tradition. Encore has previously developed and spun off Experience Corps, the Purpose Prize, and others, and we're the latest in that string. So we're now in a position of taking advantage of the support of Encore.org, and now moving out into the world on our own and taking the reins in a way that wasn't possible as while we were still part of, under the wing, so to speak, of Encore.org.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we have about a minute left in this part, but I want to be sure to find out from both of you, what should we anticipate emerging from the Encore Network in coming years and months? Janine, you want to start?
So, yeah, that's a really important question. So we did at the outset of 2021 with the Leadership Council some strategic planning, and then we also had a town hall meeting with all the members. And here's what emerged. Everyone wants to see growth of, and literally when we envision it, that there are Encore Network members in every state, in every province, literally around the globe. At the same time that there's growth, a strong desire to create a movement. So not just growth as a membership organization, but really those members working together. And so you've really seen a lot of affinity groups emerge. I like to call it, we also want to democratize. So I think too often Encore has been considered, corporate person, affluent, moving to do something else. And we know actually that Encore, an Encore stage is something that we universally experience. And there are a lot of stories. We're right now doing an Encore Networks champion to highlight people who change the narrative about who is the typical Encore, to show that it's basically everybody in their age 50 and over. Increased focus on advocacy. So one of the things that I'm heartened by, a few weeks ago in Congress, someone, I think Representative Marie Newman, introduced the Supporting Older Workers Act. And I start thinking of the potential of how we have Encore Network members in so many states in the United States. And if we collectively came together to advocate for that, what a difference it could make for the older workers that so many Encore Network members serve in their individual programs. And then finally, we're currently seeking funding for technology. We connect right now through programs like this and minimally through the website. I think there's a real strong desire of members to be able to connect anywhere, anytime through technology and learn from each other. So we really want to build a more robust technology platform that would enable that to happen, and also allow journalists to have access to Encore Network people they'd like to chat with.
And I'll just add briefly from a local perspective, there's a lot of bubble up activity across the country and in fact in other parts of the world. And I think Elise and Larry, when you hear their stories, are good examples of that. The question is, how do we connect the work that's being done locally by people who take ownership for this idea and develop a concept within their own local region so that they can make progress faster and learn from the entire group, and we can learn from them. So I think there really is the opportunity to grow really is based in part on our being able to connect more quickly to that bubble up activity that is generated by people who see an opportunity and want to make a difference in their local communities.
Great, thanks so much, Janine and Doug. Let me turn this over now to Kerry and Elise. Kerry?
Great, thank you. And hello, everyone. Oh my gosh, it's so good to see some friends here. And Elise, a pleasure to meet you. This is our first time of getting to know each other. And I'm excited to learn a little bit more about your work and how it relates to the Encore Network. And if you could just share a little bit with the audience here about what you do and how it segues into what Encore Network is doing right now.
Yes, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm a new member to the Encore Network. I was recruited by Kate Schaefer's, who's one of the membership co-chairs. We were on a webinar together and talked. We got into a small group, and I sort of talked about the work that I'm doing here in Montgomery County, Maryland. I partner with the Montgomery County Public Library to provide free LinkedIn training every month to older job seekers, 45 and older, recognizing that we have a different relationship with social media. We need to be on it, but we're not interested in telling the world who we're with, what we're drinking, what we're eating, what we're wearing, where we're vacationing every minute of the day, the way younger people do. And I realized that older job seekers had some concerns, legitimate online privacy and security concerns that unless they were addressed, they weren't going to use it. But they needed to be on particularly LinkedIn if they were job seekers, because that's where recruiters were looking for them. And if they weren't there, they were invisible. And I found that a lot of the younger trainers did not address their security concerns at all. They just didn't address it, and I knew they wouldn't use it unless they were addressed. So I started doing LinkedIn training and then partnering with the library. And so now and the great thing is the library pays me so that the job seeker doesn't have to make that choice between, do I buy a new briefcase or pair of shoes for my interview, or do I pay for LinkedIn training? And when I was laid off, in my mid-50s, I started looking for workforce development programs specifically for older workers, and found one through the Jewish Council for the Aging here in Montgomery County. It's a great program. It meets 6 times. There's 6 sessions between September and June. The cohorts are in groups of 18 to 20, and they do everything to really set the job seeker up for success. And I'm a proud graduate of the program in 2016. And when they went virtual because of the pandemic in 2020, the facilitator for the program was not comfortable with being online. She really wanted to do it in person. So she decided to step out. And I had stayed involved with the group as an occasional speaker. And when they would say, well, what can we do to repay you? I would say, well, whenever Margot retires, I want her job. And sure enough, when Margot stepped out, they called me and said, hey, Elise. So I really believe it's important to put what you want out into the universe, to speak it. And it happened, and it's a great program, and it is now virtual, which means we can reach more people. You don't have to, be able to drive to Rockville, Maryland 5 times over the course of 2 weeks. Since we're virtual now, we've had people participate from Colorado, from California, from Michigan. And I think that is sort of what Doug was talking about in terms of making the programs that we have available to people more broadly. And unfortunately, because it was a COVID, but fortunately, now that we're virtual, we can reach more and more people with really, I think, a very good model of how you can address the needs of people who are 50 and better who are seeking employment.
So what do you think some of the benefits that your organization will get out of being part of this network?
Well, I think it's important not to reinvent the wheel. If there are successful models out there, I think we can learn from each other. One of the things that we added to our Career Gateway program was a career tech, a follow-on program that addresses, refreshes people's skills in MS Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and LinkedIn training. And that's something we saw other programs doing. And we thought, is there a way we can incorporate that into what we do in addition to the resume prep, the interview prep, the online job search prep? Are there ways that we can address the skill gap in terms of one of the stereotypes of older workers, which is we're technophobes, or we haven't learned anything new in 20 years. So, but that's something we learned from other programs. So being a part of the Encore network, and particularly the 50 plus workforce affinity group, really allows me to sort of learn more about what other people are doing and see if there are parts of that we can incorporate into what we do to make our program better.
I love that. Collaboration wins the day for sure. Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you now to chat with Larry about what he's up to.
Well, thank you very much. And again, it's great to be seeing everybody. And actually, there are quite a few familiar names and faces. So that's quite wonderful. And Larry, tell us about Reinvent You. What was the idea behind it? Why did you create it? What are you trying to accomplish with Reinvent You?
Yes, thanks, Chris. I am part of this movement, the 50 plus audience. And so I've gone through my own trials and tribulations of continuing to work. And then knowing that I was in that category, I really studied what has happened to the retirement aspect of life more recently. And it's changed dramatically since our parents went through this in terms of people being prepared to retire, and more were interested to work, maybe because they had to or because they wanted to. So I felt I wanted to be a role model for this group. I'm doing this. If I can do it, maybe I can encourage them that there's a path for them to follow as well. And part of that has been also the fact that I'm a veteran, and I wanted to get closer to that community because they have a big challenge to go from a military career back to a civilian environment. And they're not subject to ageism as much, at least the officers I work with, but it's still a big challenge, and I think I could help them there.
So tell us a little bit more about the veterans and the officers that you work with. I mean, what are the particular challenges? Because there is this sense that, well, they might not have the skills that we need. Of course, we've heard that in so many categories, right? Mm-hmm. Seems to be a response to anything. They don't have the skills we need, but particularly with veterans, it seems that when you look at the overall employment rate and some of the opportunities, that's a tough shift to make.
It really is, and especially to interpret
the background that they have, because they do have a lot of skills. They're well-educated, well-trained. Leadership is there in a big way. So they serve as an attractive candidate to bring into a company. But I would say, yes, the big challenge is the right way to strategically make contact in their journey to find a new position. And I work with them in terms of changing their military dialogue into something that the hiring manager can understand and appreciate. And it really is an exchange of them learning where the challenges of the company they're talking to are and how they could then pinpoint experience that they have and demonstrate to them how it can be applied to that company's issue.
Okay, so you're doing this work, you have Reinvent You, you have a focus with military veterans. So what's the benefit of being part of the Encore network? I mean, what are you hoping to get out of it, or what are you hoping to contribute to it?
Yeah, both sides of that. First, to get out of it, I realized that there are issues that I wasn't really focused on in the beginning, and that is ageism. And I wanted to learn more about that and how it applies to all of us. It hasn't been, for whatever reason, an issue for me. I think I focused on starting a business. And if you go that route, having gray hair and the experience is well received. But it is such an issue for the majority of others who are out there trying to do a traditional job search. And therefore, I felt my experience in all the transitions that I've made and helping people strategically go about introducing themselves to companies, not through job search, common techniques of sending a letter to an ad and hoping to get an interview, but really polishing the network approach. So being with the Encore network, I know I was going to be introduced to so many others that are making transitions and dealing with these issues, and I've learned a lot about that, and I share that with those that I coach.
Okay. Well, now I think my job is to turn this back to you, Rich, right?
That's
Okay.
great. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Larry.
And so the question I have for Doug is really one to help Kerry and Chris and me and other journalists as well. And that's, what can we be doing to support your work in communities across the globe? And are there ways for us to work more closely together?
And I would first say that I wish that we had time to feature all of our members in the same way that we have Elise and Larry, because I think the more we know about each other, the more we can take advantage of the gift of their experience, but also the benefit of the cross connection. And I would invite everybody to join me in answering the.
Oops.
Doug, you're muted.
Doug, can't hear you.
We lost your mic there, Doug. Here we
I don't know how that happened. Anyway, I'm sorry. I think this is likely to be an iterative process. The more we learn as we go, the more opportunities I think we'll see. But I'll start with a couple of thoughts. One is, the work that you do often incorporates individual stories. And those stories have to come from someplace. And I'm sure you have lots of ways to identify those. But to the extent that you know more about us and the kind of work that we do, it seems apparent to me that there may be opportunities for you to reach out to us to see, who we know and how we might be helpful in identifying individual cases that help to make a point. And we're working in the direction of, at least I would like to see us do a better job of identifying those kinds of stories and create actually a story bank, not just for people who do the work that you do, but also for all of us, because a lot of those stories don't need to be locally grounded. And if we can share stories among ourselves, we'll be creating a stronger foundation for the work that all of us do together. I think, secondly, that there's an opportunity as we learn. First of all, I'll just say the obvious, and that is that the work that you do informs our work every day. So, you know, there's an obvious benefit in the podcasts and the books and in the articles and so on. But I also think that since all of us are doing work on the ground, you know, where I used the word bubble up earlier. You know, I think we bubble up information that once it's aggregated can help to add to the research that you have access to that creates a kind of flow of information that suggests trends, suggests opportunities, and suggests needs that all of us can work together. You know, we serve the same audience, right? The audience that we see is the audience that reads your books, that reads the articles and so on. And you create a conduit of information, and we're trying to do the same thing. So, you know, I think there's a shared mission in a way, and I think the more closely we'll work together, the more opportunities we'll see in helping each other reach that goal.
Thank you. And now I'll turn it over to Lenora.
Great, thank you. Let me do all of this little housekeeping things of removing spotlights. I want to thank everybody for joining us for this first part. Elise, Larry, Doug, and Janine. And here we go. And so now, you know, given a little bit that you've heard about some of our members and our secession, as it weren't, rather than as it were, what does that say to you, about what you've been seeing nationally in terms of trends, and then what are some of the efforts that you are doing? How do those efforts overlap with ours? So that's a free for all. Anybody can step in.
I'll start off if that's okay, and then I'll turn it over to Kerry and Chris. So as you mentioned, I am the managing editor at Next Avenue, and I'm in charge of all the money and work and purpose stories we do. I write some of them, but many of them are written by the likes of Kerry and Chris, thankfully. And so we are very interested in all the things that Encore Network does and are curious to learn more about that. And our readers are very interested in that. Our readers are in their 50s and 60s, and many of them are either thinking about or in the middle of Encore careers, or just that stage of life and trying to figure things out. They're looking for meaning and purpose. In particular, recently we just started 2 series. One is going to be all about second acts. So we're looking for articles to help people start them and run them. So if you would like to let me know about how you can be helpful in that, we'd love to talk to you. And then we're going to be trying to find one second act, a minority entrepreneur over 50 who either has just started or is about to start an Encore career business of some kind. And we want to follow that person over the course of the next 12 months. So we are looking for candidates for that. If you have any suggestions about who they may be or how to find them, let me know. You can email me at reisenberg@nextavenue.org. End of my commercial. Let me turn it over now to Kerry.
I like your commercial. So yeah, I mean, just as Rich said, I absolutely, I already want to write about Elisa. And her group. I get so excited when I hear about these great tools for my readers to go to in order to learn more. So one thing that your network can do for me is I can link people to your educational resources. That's huge for me to find different people within the network that can help, forward, because my whole mission is about helping people find work, over 50, find work and, financial security for their future. So anything, it so resonates with me what a lot of you in this group do. One thing that was, and finding people people, because we really, it's the stories like when Dory Mincer and I work on a story together, I can quote her for expert and a career coach who is working with someone over 50. And then hopefully, if she's kind to me, will tell me, lead me to one of her great clients who can illustrate that. Because as we all know, it's that narrative, it's that person's story, that authentic story that really resonates with readers, and they go, aha, I see myself there, or I've just learned something from this person's journey. So it's really finding people is the hardest part of my job, because you can't just quote experts. You really need the people to share how it works for them and how they've been able to succeed. So to me, those are the two important things. But I think all the members of this Encore network have something that can really benefit my work, and I can, help spread the word about what you all do as well. It's sort of a win for everyone. One thing that encore.org did, and I think Doug just alluded to, sort of putting together eventually some kind of database of stories of this sort of thing. And Encore, for their Purpose Prize winners and the fellows and different things, there would be bios on the site. And sometimes when I was like, oh my gosh, I got to find somebody to interview for this story, because often I don't know I need a person until right when I need them. I could cruise through that database and say, oh, this is good. And then I'd reach out to, Betsy Worley or Marcy Abaher and say, hey, can you help connect me with this person? Because I'd like to interview them. So to me, that would be a cool thing, Doug, if that would come to fruition. And I could go on, but I'll turn it over to Chris.
I don't think I have much to add. I just would echo everything. I mean, it is really important. And Elise, it was great to learn about your story. I had the exact same thought, Kerry. There's a story there. And I was on Marketplace a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking about the role that public libraries played. And I wish that I had had that example to toss in there in terms of education and the role that libraries have really, rather than disappearing during the digital age, have actually expanded their footprint and are becoming increasingly important to community and community education. And with Larry, thinking about the military veterans, and that would be a classic example, I think, of what Kerry's talking about. Want the expertise about what are the challenges faced by veterans as they're making their transition, as they're making their encore. But then you also need the examples of interviewing people who are going through that process, who have that background, who have dealt with the challenges in order to make a richer story. So I guess the only other thing I would add, since we're all sort of, we know quite a few of you, you know us, is a lot of it is we're looking for themes. What has changed? If you think about the period of time that we're going through right now, there are so many cross currents, and you can look at things in different ways. How is it going to play out? And so a lot of it also is tapping into your judgment, tapping into what you're seeing, what you're experiencing. And I was thinking about when I wrote my book on retirement, and I think it was published in 2014. So I would have met with Doug 2013. He was kind enough, was at the Holiday Inn Express in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He was kind enough to meet me in the area where you get the free coffee, and we talked. And one of the things that he said at that point was, there's a lot of people that want to be working longer, having encore career, but a lot of organizations aren't getting the message at this point. So it's sort of like the supply is there, but not the demand. And so that stuck with me. That was sort of, okay, this is a dynamic that's happening here, and it's been changing over time. So it's sort of checking in on judgment. What are you seeing? How are things playing out? How does working from home, how is this going? There's a very positive case. Kerry's written about it a number of times, about there's a very positive case to see how working at home may actually increase the opportunities for workers in their encore, but will it also reinforce inequities with an aging population and the need that many people have to work, but that's not going to be an option for them. So that's, I guess, the only thing I would add is this: we're always kind of interested in trends, how things are playing out, what is shifting, what is changing, what are you seeing?
Thank you for that. And it's interesting that when you're talking about the changes and the trends and the impact that COVID has had in making some of those shifts, I think more just encouraging a more accelerated shift to changes, but then some of those inequities. I guess I'd like you to just kind of talk about that a little bit more. What have you seen, if anything yet? Because I realize we're kind of at the beginning of coming out of the darker days of, at least in our country, of the pandemic. And, you know, how do you see people over 50 better preparing themselves for those kinds of changes, since many of these changes are technology based, right? If you don't have broadband, if you don't have access, those inequities become more pronounced if you can't access the telehealth and all of that. So what have you seen begin to emerge as a major change or trend in relation to COVID particularly, and then just generally?
So just go ahead, Kerry.
Oh, I was going to say, I thought we'd start with Rich and go around again if you want to do that, Rich.
Yep.
Sure. Well, as you say, Laura, it's a little early to know too much yet, although we, you know, all three of us read a lot of surveys and talk to a lot of people. And what we're finding is, in some cases, you know, COVID has made a lot of people rethink their lives and what's important to them and where they can find fulfillment. And sometimes that's through work and sometimes it's through volunteering. The issue often then becomes, as Chris was suggesting, you know, can you find somebody who will let you pursue what you want to pursue? And I think one reason so many older people are starting their own businesses or nonprofits is because they're often finding that they can't find employers who will let them do what they want to do, so they'll do it themselves. And that can be very exciting for them, challenging to be sure. But I'd love to think that more employers will now realize the potential of older workers. I'm not sure that they will. I think they tend to see them as expensive and sometimes view them improperly as ineffective and not technologically savvy and all those stereotypes that we all know too well. So I think it's going to be a very interesting experiment right now to see what happens, whether people can find what they want, whether employers will let them find what they want. Kerry?
Yeah, well, I think that's definitely a big theme that Rich just hit on. You know, sort of what matters to people has become extremely important in this time where during 2020 particularly. But the themes in researching for my book, In Control at 50 Plus, How to Succeed in the New World of Work, the trends I saw were very clear. You know, remote work, the genie's out of the bottle, it's here to stay. And I think it's a huge benefit for many older workers if you're in a white collar position in terms of fighting back ageism. There's just so many benefits there in terms of not being, you know, just side by side with someone who's a lot younger and being judged by your cover, to being judged by productivity and performance. And potentially, if health reasons were keeping you from being able to commute to a job or a workplace wasn't set up appropriately for you, it can increase your time in a job and your opportunities. So remote work is one. Definitely, as Rich just said, entrepreneurship has taken off in the over 50 set for these very reasons. Why not? Why now? It's the perfect time. With technology, we can do it without having bricks and mortar. And a lot of workers have older workers have said, hey, you know what? I don't want to deal with rejection right now. And Chris can talk more about entrepreneurship, but that's definitely a theme. I also see more contract work, which I think is fairly problematic for older workers. Not so much of your 60s and your 70s, but in your 50s. If it's contract work, you don't have benefits, that can create enormous problems down the road for financial security in terms of having the discipline to save for retirement in particular. And let me tell you, health benefits are crazy expensive if you're not employed when you're in your 50s and 60s before Medicare. I mean, I pay over $800 a month for independent coverage, and it's crazy. And the other theme I see coming out is career transition. Oh my gosh, a lot of people, because of what Rich said, they're giving some thought. And hey, guess what? I do have runway to change career. It's no longer the outliers. It's now, here and now. And now I'm going to let Chris chime in.
So I think it's a bifurcated world. And in the bifurcated world, the most powerful force are when employers are looking for workers. the definition of a good economy is when firms are looking for workers, not when workers are looking for firms. And right now, firms are looking for workers. And the fact of the matter is, I think you can see more employers are realizing if I can't be hiring the people that I want to be hiring, I better keep the ones that I have on the payroll for a longer period of time. And there is greater consideration and value in terms of thinking about experience. And so I think that there's a very good chance that age discrimination and ageism will have taken a step down in many organizations, in many companies, when we're looking at the better educated worker, the skilled worker. It doesn't have to be college education, but it has to have skill. For example, there's a machinist company here in Minnesota, and they're investing in automation, not to get rid of workers, but to keep their older workers on the payroll longer. So you're seeing that kind of, because those are the people who are also teaching the younger generation coming out of the community college to move in. But COVID was a harsh, stark look at the deep inequities in our society and our economy. And that if you are in your 50s and you have a low and unstable income, the odds that you're going to have a good income with decent benefits in your 60s are minuscule. And I think this is the big challenge that we as a movement have got to face more and more, have got to tell more and more stories about. And as a movement, that is where a lot of the focus needs to be going forward. So I think it's a bifurcated story. It's a bifurcated world.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate, Chris, hearing you talk about how manufacturers in particular, but employers in general, are shifting and looking to retain workers who are older, and actually looking at changing some of their equipment so that they can bring people on, and just shifting their mindset. Because as Kerry points out, if you try to adopt a contract, freelance kind of attitude at particular ages, the healthcare alone will keep you out. Not only just the general living expenses, which are so much greater. And we're getting ready to shift to questions from the floor, and we have had some come in, but just to kind of perhaps add a little bit of lightness to that very serious topic of COVID, could you reflect a little bit, the three of you, on how you shifted, or if you ever shifted, if you were always focused on writing about the 50 plus core demographic group, or if you found yourself evolving into it, much like a lot of people here have found themselves evolving into participating in the Encore network and the needs of this demographic. Any insights, any reflections as to how that shift came for you, and how it's been going? Because clearly it's been going well, but sometimes when we reflect, we kind of think, it's allowed me to put all of the pieces of my life together, or it's allowed me to really delve more deeply into a passion that I have. So we can go the same way, or we can go in reverse order.
Rich?
I think I've been volunteered. I'll say that I wasn't always writing and editing about people in the second half of life. I started a Money magazine out of college as a fact checker and then as a writer. And so for many years, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I was writing really for and about people in their 40s and 50s and 60s, and didn't really know much about what I was talking about, but fortunately found people who did. And I've sort of grown into what I'm now doing. And so I'm delighted to be working for a website whose audience is people in their 50s and 60s, because they're my people. And I feel like I understand their issues a little better. When I'm working with freelance writers who haven't written for us before, I tell them they need to think of the reader as somebody who has been around the block a little bit. We don't need to tell them sort of what is a tax deduction. They've filled out enough tax forms by now, but there's still a lot that they want to learn and can learn and need to learn. And fortunately, we're able to do that. So I feel like I have a greater appreciation of this audience than I did before, because I've sort of grown into it. Kerry?
Yeah, so what happened for me is I had sort of a career path through financial journalism at Forbes, and at Money working with Rich, doing personal finance at US News and World Report, writing about consumer issues and news you can use. and USA Today, writing about taxes and retirement as a columnist there. And when I started my own business, I never burned any bridges. So luckily, all my former employers were happy to employ me to write as a freelancer. And US News and World Report said, hey, Kerry, we're starting this thing called Second Acts. Can you go around and find us, write profiles of people who are boomers or in their 50s or what have you, or making complete huge career changes. And so for 3.5 years, they paid for me to go around the country and meet really interesting people who had made these big career shifts. And I turned it into a book called What's Next? Follow Your Passion and Find Your Dream Job. But it was a blast. And I got so excited and inspired by these people that I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. These narratives, these people stories, it was just such fun. And so I suddenly got motivated to write in this area, and AARP got very excited about my book. And so they asked me to start writing a column for them about great jobs for everyone over 50. So I started writing a regular column for them on this topic. And so it just, the whole thing, my knowledge of it kept growing. And yay, guess what? I was actually in the demographic. So I could relate. And I'm telling you, it's just moved along. And then Rich has given me this wonderful opportunity at What's Next Avenue to write more about, second acts, about entrepreneurship, all about women over 50 and money. And so this has been tremendously fun. And the fact is, I'm living it myself. And, I know what it's like to send out resumes and have nobody respond and be ghosted. And I know what it's like to be a little worried about future financial security. So I feel like I'm writing, my audience is often myself. And so I totally get it. And it resonates with me. So I'm here to stay in this definitely in this demographic for now. So Chris?
Yeah, I'm here to stay too. I mean, and I just had to say, one of the things, I don't know if you had this, Kerry and Rich, but one of the nice things about this job is you get to interview people who are doing really interesting things, and they're making these transitions, and transitions are absolutely fascinating. And transitions always take longer than hoped for, longer than expected, but there's always great stories there. And I'll leave an interview and say, oh God, I could do that. That's incredible. And then about an hour or two later, go, now actually, I really like what I'm doing right myself. I get to talk to these people. So for me, I had two strands to my career in journalism, public radio, and Business Week, and a number of other publications. And one has been personal finance, and one has been economics. And if you think about the last 2-3 decades, the personal finance story has been about retirement savings, the lack of retirement savings among baby boomers. And the economic story, one of the economic stories was how the underlying dynamism of the US economy was going to disappear, because you're just going to have too many of these old people, and they're just going to weigh down the economy. And it was around the time that I mentioned when I was talking to Doug Dixon back in 2012, 2013, I just became aware of this scattered research around the world, much of it in Europe. And it really pushed back against the story about about the dependent elderly and what the impact was going to be on the economy. And I just started following this research, and started calling people, and it sort of all came together. And I ended up with a book on retirement, and then my latest book, Purpose and a Paycheck. But there is so much research out there, and I just became fascinated with continuing to work longer and starting your business in the second half of life. And that's a large extent of what my focus has been, remains. As you can see, I am of that era. And it's exciting and it's fun. And yes, if I interview some of you, I'll be going, oh, that's incredible. But I'd rather write about you than actually do what you're doing.
There's definitely a lot of wisdom in, and I think many of us know that A, the power of saying yes, right, Kerry, to the things you just don't know, and B, looking at the question beyond the question, or what's being done beyond what people expect to be the tried and true answer. And that's where you find that inspiration that Chris is talking about, and certainly the impetus and the energy to keep moving forward, as Rich was talking about. But in that idea of noticing trends that or noticing that things aren't going the way the narrative said that they would go, right? The dependent elderly, et cetera. What other areas what do you think we need to push a little bit further to help people or to help others, the employers, understand what is happening. What can we do in the Encore network or among these various individuals on this call to kind of move things forward? Since you've talked a lot about what you have seen moving forward, but what else, what could we do, as Betsy Worley says, to needle these ideas, certain ideas, even more?
Well, I'll start and say, do whatever you can to tell your stories through journalists like ours and others as well, to get the word out there about how talented and capable people in their 50s and 60s and 70s can be and are, and what they're doing. If you can, try to get meetings with HR people and talk to them about potential candidates you might have, or how to find people like that, and find out why they aren't hiring those people, and see if they have misconceptions that you can change. It's slow and plodding, but it's work that needs to get done.
No, I think it's really important to, talk about ageism. Just talk about it. I mean, we sort of bury it. We know it's existed. It lingers. It's really nasty, and no one. But we need to tell these stories, and we need to scream it out loud to a certain extent, and not be strident. But this has to be an issue that is on the forefront in HR departments across the country, and people have to pay attention that this is important. I mean, the way the demographics are, it's no longer a triangle anymore, right? There's not as many younger people coming up. So ultimately, they need older workers on their team. It's more like a block now. The generations are all pretty even. So I think this is really important that they get the message, like we talked earlier about retaining older workers for so many reasons. But the other thing, I think it's important to get the story out about ageism. But what I feel people really need is understanding about self-employment, how to be a self-employed person. Because frankly, moving forward, I mentioned briefly contract positions, this is the future. I mean, employers through COVID have realized that, hey, guess what? It's a lot cheaper not to have you on full staff and not paying your benefits, but we'd love to have you as a contract worker. And so I think a lot of people in this over 50 demographic, and they're coming up behind us, the Gen Xers, everyone, this is a fact of life. And any resources you can help people learn how to manage as a self-employed person, how to get paid, how to make sure you get paid, how to save for retirement, all kinds of those things. It's not easy. And how to do your taxes. And we expect everyone can figure this out, but I think some of the people on this call know that that's an issue and how we can serve them.
I think the only thing to add to that is now is the time, because what changes the minds of leadership is a tight labor market. Again, when employers are looking for workers, workers have some leverage. They have an edge. You can change minds. It becomes, because I think for too long, the sort of human resources department liked the story about older workers, liked going to conferences about older workers, but it kind of was on the side. It wasn't at the core. It was almost under the charitable, philanthropical attitude. Well, now the business case to me is absolutely compelling. And so with the market that we're dealing with, and the fact is, if you think about what Kerry's talking about in terms of self-employment, in terms of entrepreneurship, and the Kaufman data, I believe it's a majority of new businesses formed in 2020 were 45 years and older. So part of what's going on here is I also think it's a brain drain. It's an experience drain. And this is the time to be making the case in public media, on the radio stations, to your colleagues, any meetings or conferences you go to. Seize the opportunity, because the story of the past 2 decades has been, after 2000, is that there was a line of workers out the door. And what managements could do is say, you know what? We need an HVAC technician, but we'd like to have an HVAC technician that has a master's degree in classical music. And now what's happening is you don't need a master's degree in classical music. You don't need actually even a BA. What you need to be able to do is be an HVAC technician. So seize the moment. Now is the time when employers are looking for workers.
A lot of the conversation that we've had has been broad. And it has been looking at all people over the age of 50 plus. But we've had a few questions coming in asking about specific people. those who are people of color and over the age of 50. More importantly, the Encore Network movement the Encore movement, excuse me, as a whole has been questioned, I will say, to put it politely, that it might be focusing a little bit too much on the needs of those who are 50 and over, but white. And so I thought I'd ask, what have you been seeing regarding people of color and from the various socioeconomic groups, because not all people of color are living at or below the poverty line, as some in the media would have you believe. What have you noticed? Have you seen that their stories, and how could their stories be told? What might make their stories more interesting to the general readership, as it is often called? Any thoughts there?
I'll start by saying at Next Avenue, we try to write about those issues as often as we can. I take Chris's point absolutely, that it's a bifurcated society in many ways, and I think that that certainly goes for older Americans and race and employers, but mostly about finances, I would say. I mean, you look at the numbers and you see that the amount of savings among Black and Hispanics is by and large much less than it is for white people of the same age. You know, I want us to be doing a better job at Next Avenue in telling the story, to be more helpful, and we love any advice and information that can help us to do that. Kerry?
Yeah, I think that's great, Rich. And I think, Rich, actually, you're a great advocate, because Rich, when we work for Rich, he really always is, looking for diversity and the people that we profile in our stories. And I have made it and I must say, someone at Encore, Marcy Albaher, has been really helpful in pushing me this direction, is to open up my network and really expand my network beyond, because, it's easy to just write stories about people and people know. So, in some of my circles didn't always have the diversity, and I'm be perfectly honest about that. So I've been working very hard that I make a point of every story I write for the New York Times or for Rich or for Market Watch, if possible. I try to make sure I have diverse, some range of people that I'm talking to, both in terms of the experts with racial diversity and in addition to with the individual. So I think it's a matter of all of us in the media, really pushing out and asking for these other stories. And just anecdotally, I know, and this is stuff I've written for Rich, is that women of color tend to be starting businesses at a rapid pace, much faster than the white cohort is. And they tend to be smaller businesses that often are started as side gigs, but they have the ability to grow because they're started that way. And it's a great story, and I need to do more on that. But Rich and I have touched on it, and we will continue to.
And capital is a bigger issue often for minority entrepreneurs and wannabes than for whites.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I think it is an important transformative moment for a lot of media organizations who are just making a concerted effort to, expand their networks, to increase their diversity and inclusion, particularly in a lot of the experts that they're talking to. I think in terms of the Encore world, there's sort of two that really interest me. One is the Encore world has been very associated with college educated, and but I think the dividing line, a lot of it is skill. And a lot of blue collar workers have a lot of skill and have the ability to have Encore careers. And Rich has published a lot of these stories. Kerry's done a number of these stories. But I still think that there is this needs to be a greater push in terms of thinking about skill for the non-college educated worker. And then there's just so many stereotypes. And just to use, what you mentioned, I mentioned, I can't remember, had this podcast, Small Change Money Stories from the Neighborhood. And what it is there's a stereotype that if you're living on a low and unstable income, you're not financially literate. You're not smart with your money. And yet if you're living on a low and unstable income, you know where every penny is going. And so what we do is we interview, and the goals are the same, own a home, start a business, educate your children. And we go into a neighborhood and we just find somebody who's kind of figured it out and how to start a business, own a home. And the core is always about community. It's always collaborative. We don't talk to the economists or the certified financial planners. So I think one of the things to off of that is to do the same thing in the Encore world. That I have a suspicion that there are a lot of people who are living on a low, unstable income because they have to, but also because they're creative and collaborative, are coming up with Encore careers that we don't know about, that we don't understand, that they're not part of the networks that we're typically tied into. They're not part of the networks for the people that are on this Zoom, but they exist. And, I think that's one of the things to, for myself, and I think is to really, boost that kind of journalism.
So if people were out, these individuals who are creating these Encore careers that we don't know about, or people who are on this call, if they wanted to pitch an idea, is it more attractive to you to hear an idea that's focused on their business or their efforts, or so it's a very personal kind of story that some of you were alluding to, or do we in our pitch or our explanation need to provide a broader, more national or statewide kind of impact to make it attractive? What makes the best case to you so that you can make the best business case to your listeners and the business owners and the bankers who fund all of these adventures?
I think it's either. I mean, don't you think, Rich, Kerry, if you got a good story and it's about an individual or, hey, that's great. If it ties into a broader trend or it's tied to, so my reaction would be either would be great.
Yeah, I love the people stories myself. That's what gets me jazzed up. But often my editors, and there's one on this call here, they like to have they want to cite a trend, a statistic, something that you can, the news peg they call for a story. You need something to ground it. Why are we telling this story now? What's the lesson here kind of thing? So Rich isn't always that way. I'm just giving him a hard time. But that's kind of, a lot of journalism 101 is
Not always.
All right, on to you.
Yeah, I would agree with both what Kerry and Chris said. And I would say, yeah, we are looking for trend stories because we are a national audience. And that's true for most of the articles that Kerry and Chris are writing for wherever they're writing. Occasionally, Chris will do something that's local for Minnesota. But, so if you can say, well, what I'm doing is happening all over the place, or what I'm doing could be duplicated, replicated in other parts of the country, or I know somebody else is doing something like that, that's great. We want to avoid being too promotional for anybody, any business, and that's true whether it's an entrepreneur or whether it's, General Mills. But we're happy to use examples and stories that say, here's how they do it, and we thought you'd want to know about that story. So, it's a fine line that we walk.
The other thing is, if a story, it's just such a hard thing to explain, because you want to tell your stories and you want to get people to recognize what you're doing. But if I see that something's been told in other outlets, I probably won't do it, at least not right now. So if it's getting too much coverage, I'll back away from it and wait to find another way into the story. So it's a weird dichotomy, but it is a challenge.
And one of the things that's always unfair about answering these questions is there's a randomness to it. It's just so random. And I'm sure, people I've interviewed have had this experience. We'll talk for 45 minutes and we're getting ready to get off the phone or the Zoom. And you go, oh, by the way, I just wanted to mention this. And that's the thing that I actually decide, well, this is what needs to go into the story. And if it was 4 weeks ago, what Elise said would have worked its way into a marketplace commentary about the public library. So there always is this randomness. The one thing that I will say on a practical level, it doesn't, most of the time doesn't work, is I'll write a story for Rich and then I'll get 10 pitches that are saying the exact same story. And I can't, and they may be really, I probably wish that I had known about these examples, but I'm not going to go back to Rich. Or if I do, he's just going to look at me like, stop wasting my time. And so that's just one thing. If it's out there, I may save it. And as Kerry's saying, 6 months later, return to it. but not going to leap right back onto the same story.
And that's a good point, because a lot of times you'll listen to Marketplace, or at least I will, and you'll think about how this is a national experience. But then I think we as individuals can turn around to some of our local news outlets and say, hey, it was on Marketplace, it was in Next Avenue, it was in Money Magazine, it was, in the Journal, and here's what's happening, in your neck of the woods as well. It's another way to keep the story alive, and then, for all of us on the call to stop you from inundating Chris's email box and not seeing the story move further. You can go to your local NPR station or TV broadcast news outlet and say, hey, think about this. It's a way to give his story as well as your story more legs. And I think that's an important thing to remember. That's that thinking about the question in a different way and in other ways. We've had a couple of questions come in, really, I think more comments, but nevertheless questions about caregiving and the impact that has on employment, and just how does that work its way into the conversation, along with, and I know this is really going to sound very random when I pair these two together, but along with people who are taking the entrepreneurial plunge, but not necessarily looking to make money in what it is that they are doing. So they're occupying their time, they're renewing their sense of purpose within their community or family. How have you seen those stories and those efforts realized in the greater conversation nationally? And how might we look to shape those to make them continuously appealing to you and to your colleagues in our local areas?
I'll start and say that, family caregiving is a major concern for more and more people. I think that's only going to be more true going forward. I think to a little bit of an extent, the pandemic has made employers more understanding, or at least more cognizant, or at least more aware of the family caregiving responsibilities that some of their employees have, and the toll that it can take on them. We've seen lots of studies that show that many people who are family caregivers have either had to quit their jobs or cut back on their hours or come in late or not do everything they want to be doing because they need to take care of their mother or their sister or their father, whoever it may be. That's a problem for the employers. It's a problem for the employees. I want to think that maybe because of what we've been experiencing lately, it'll be a little easier for family caregivers to talk with their bosses about this, and for bosses to be a little more understanding, though I would say that many of them still are not. To the other question, Lenore, I would say, yeah, we're finding that there are quite a few people who want to start a second act, not necessarily to make money or for income, although if that were to happen, they're not against it, but they're doing it mostly because they're looking for fulfillment, satisfaction, purpose, meaning in their life. And sometimes that's through paid work. Sometimes it's through volunteering. I wrote about a guy a couple years ago who was a lawyer, was not happy as a lawyer, and decided he was going to start a chocolate making factory. And you wouldn't think that that would be necessarily a job that would give people great meaning and purpose, although maybe cavities, but he's loved it, and his daughter works on it now, and he does get a lot of meaning of it. So meaning and purpose can come in lots of different ways. Kerry?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, Rich, and it's this whole bit of the longevity of people are financially secure, having the ability to have the mental engagement of a workplace or a volunteer situation where they're involved and needed and feeling relevant. These are all important to having a chapter of life that is rewarding to everyone and keeping us healthier as well. But one thing about caregiving, I definitely think coming out of the pandemic, more employers saw into their employees' homes and saw what they were going through and recognized that this was something, especially if you were dealing with an elderly a parent or relative, that you never would talk about that around the office. So certainly you don't mind saying, I got to go to Jimmy's soccer game, but you're not going to say you're going to a doctor's appointment with your mom and ask for the flexibility. I think employers started to recognize that this was an important piece of the caregiving, and I myself had to deal with it. I know it's critical, and I do think that flexibility is a key thing, which remote work does allow for older workers to have the flexibility, because it's not just right now. I mean, the generation coming behind us is going to be taking care of us. So these are caregiving things that need to be put in place today, and we need to make the case to employers to pay attention.
Yeah, so the only thing to add, I think that what Kerry mentioned about flexibility is going to be one of the real keys to watch going forward, because the surveys have been consistent for years about people of all ages want more flexibility for different reasons, and employers have largely resisted it. Now, however, having gone through COVID with the working from home, the greater demands on flexibility, so that's something to follow really closely and see how many more employers invest and are willing to invest in the kind of systems that will allow for more flexibility for their employees. The other thing is that I think there really is kind of a standard that you can use to judge whether or not the Encore movement is successful or not, and involves the professional caregiver. And, you know, the family caregiver can only do so much. And we, as a society, the role of the professional caregiver is critical. It's 89% women, it's 40% 55 years and older, it's 56% women of color. And yet before COVID, the average wage was $12.12. That's the median wage, $12.12 an hour. And people were making about $20,000 because of unstable incomes. So if you want to know whether or not the Encore movement is succeeding, I think you look at the professional caregiving workforce, which is also fast growing, but a lot of turnover. And this is going to be one of the defining issues for the Encore movement over the next decade. How is the professional caregiving workforce treated? How do they get better pay? How do they get better benefits?
Yeah, that there's no question. As a person like you, Kerry, I'm taking care of my mother, so deal with that every day. And you didn't necessarily keep it out of the workplace, but certainly everyone in my office knows a lot more than they ever probably cared to know since we've gone in. We had lockdown here in March, and then, you know, the world started to open up.
Can I quickly add, I just recently posted on LinkedIn about this, that part of the reason I became an entrepreneur is, and my financial planner says, you know, you're making half of what you made 7 years ago, but you're happier. And I said, yes, I'm happier because as an entrepreneur, I have the flexibility to take care of the two people that are most important to me in my life, which I would not be able to do working a 9 to 5. Yeah. My husband, who has a chronic illness, and my mother, who's aging. And so being able to take care of both of them, the only way I could do that is through entrepreneurship, where I can control my schedule.
Yes, I think that was Elise for those of you who might be looking at the speaker view. Thank you for that. As we're looking to wind down, I know you guys have done a lot about helping us to better understand what makes a story attractive and what not to do, not to repeat what was just on last night's marketplace. But what might we, how might we best submit stories to you? And also, what might we do to just help you? We know Richard wants some stories and some people who he can follow for a piece that they're doing. And I've got some people to pitch to you, at least one person of color as well. So what else can we do, and how to best do that? What form of communication?
I guess it's best for me to email ideas to me, and I'd like to just get to know you. It's kind of fun to, especially if I don't already know you, to set up, let's have a conversation, a phone call or something, just so I can learn more about what you do and how it might work into, because I have lots of clients that I write for, and I never know exactly what it's going to be next. But I too am always looking for second act stories for a variety of outlets in addition to Rich. So entrepreneur stories and any, you know, sort of things on, but services and things that help older workers are big on my agenda. But it's really, I think the best stories, the best way of getting things is to get to know each other, because then I trust there's this trust that when I need an idea or help or an expert, I can reach out, and I know that you're the go-to person for me to contact. So if that makes sense, that's the best way to get it started.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. Email and, just a conversation that's not about a story, but just the conversation about what you're seeing, what you're doing, what you've learned, why you got into the business the way that you did. Just a general conversation is always good.
Excellent. Many people have asked for your emails. I know Rich has given them. So if you feel comfortable putting your emails in the chat, please do. Otherwise, I know everybody can get Kerry and Chris through Rich in some way, shape, or form. I really want to thank everybody for their questions. I'm sorry some of them were not addressed, but I tried to kind of get the gist of most of what you guys were asking in there. I want to thank Richard, Kerry, and Chris for participating in this freewheeling experience, certainly the last third of the conversation. And I'm going to invite Doug back to kind of take us out. Doug.
Thank you, Lenora, and thanks to Rich, Kerry, and Chris as well for a really inspiring and insightful conversation. I'm sorry that we didn't have the opportunity to feature all of our members as we did Larry and Elise, because I think you'd see, first of all, a broad variety of stories about how we all came to this. And the work that we're doing, and obviously lots of potential fodder for your own writing. So maybe we'll think about ways to do that in the future. As I mentioned earlier, our roles interweave, and I think the things that we've talked about today reinforce that notion. So I think finding ways for us to continue to work more closely is important, certainly important to our work, and I think probably important to yours as well. I also want to thank Lenora for doing an excellent job of moderating today's program, and to Elise and Larry for standing in for all of the rest of the network members, and Janine as well. And also to Keely Thompson, who is managing the technology behind the scenes. So she's the, kind of the puppet master that makes all of this work. So thank you very much. Do you want to cue the slides, Keely? Thank you. So before we wrap up, I want to call attention again to what Rich and Kerry and Chris are all doing. Take advantage of nextavenue.org. It's a wonderful resource. And if you're not already reading those stories on a regular basis, please do. You'll see work, in addition to his job as editor, work by Rich as well as by Chris and Kerry, and also Rich's podcast, Friends Talk Money. The next slide, you'll see some of Kerry's work, her book on entrepreneurship, never too late to get rich, and on remote jobs, one of the best book titles I think of all time, Great Pajama Jobs, and the one coming out early next year, In Control at 50 Plus. I know I've already signed up for that, and I hope you will too. And by the way, there's a great there's a good number of other titles, books that Kerry has written as well, and dig into those if you haven't already. And Chris, who is author of Purpose and a Paycheck, and his earlier book was called Unretirement, and his podcast, if you can go back, sorry, I can't read this fast, Small Change, stories about money from the neighborhood, and also his work as economics reporter on Marketplace. The mission of the network is to champion civic, social, and economic contributions of people over 50, And we do that through building community, learning, and action. And one of the ways we do that is through programs like today. And we have a couple coming up that I just want to call your attention to. Next month on November 16th, it'll be November already, we'll be featuring Andy Goodman, who will talk to us about the impact of storytelling. We've talked about storytelling a lot today, but we're going to be talking about it in terms of how we develop stories for impact in the work that we do. And then coming up in December, we'll have Ken Dykewald, who has been a leader in this field for a number of years through his research, writing, and thought leadership, talking about his newest book, What Retirees Want, as well as a proposal that he is floating around a concept called Elder Core. So I also want to mention our affinity groups, which have come up in the conversation. The one that has been mentioned several times is Over 50 Employment. And if you haven't already had an opportunity to participate in those, I think you'll find it very interesting, great resources and conversations floated to the surface there. And also on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And also mentioned today, and then one that's just getting started on intergenerational programs. Also, Larry Stewart is developing a concept for a resources affinity group. And I think there the idea is to make resources more broadly available across the network, but also to curate those so that people don't have to wade through all of the stuff that's out there, and only the good stuff like that written by Rich, Kerry, and Chris bubble to the surface, and we can take advantage of the really good cream of the crop. And then another possible affinity group on policy and advocacy. So if you have interest in any of those topics, let me know or let Janine know, and we will make certain that we move those concepts along. Because I think the more work that we do in this more intimate context, the more quickly and the more effectively we can make progress. Now, as we come to a close, if you can launch the poll, Keely. At all of our meetings, we like to ask a question. How much of what you've learned today will be valuable going forward? If you can indicate, that would be great. And by the way, feel free to offer comments in the chat. We need your input and want your comments so that we can continue to develop programs that are useful and help to build community and to inspire action. So with that, I will just mention that today's webinar has been recorded, and in a few days' time, we'll get that information out to you, as well as the great resources that Rich, Kerry, and Chris have brought to our attention, and their contact information so that you can be in touch with them going forward. And with that, I will say thank you to everybody, including all of you as participants today, and look forward to seeing you again on October 19th with Andy Goodman.
Thank you.